I'm Daisy. I'm running for SU president, and I'm running because I have a lot of ideas on how to make this a more inclusive, a more sustainable, a better space for students to feel protected in, and that includes protest rights, activism. And as someone who's been involved in a lot of those things and not felt safe and not felt supported, I think it's a really great platform to utilise to make sure that those changes happen with the help of other students.
I'm Will. I'm also running for SU president, and over the past few months, as a member of the Marxist Society, I've been involved in many activist campaigns, Palestine, workers' rights movements, these things. And I believe that there is revolutionary energy at this university and around universities around the country. And I think that the student union should be the embryo, the real centre of a larger movement, a larger student mass movement alongside workers around the country.
I'm Jono, me too. I'm also running president. I've worked at the SU for 3 years now. I've been a student for 4. This is the place where I've met my friends, my partner, had so many great opportunities working here. If I'm not at home, I'm here. And yeah, I just seen a few issues around and things that I know that can be better. And I would know that I would regret it if I didn't at least try to make those things better. So that's why I'm running for it.
Right, so to be fair, I'll start with some more directed questions. First of all, in terms of over the last few years, there have been, I would say, that I've been doing the elections anyway, there's been multiple sort of far left, Marxist, far socialist candidates running for president, and generally they haven't tended to do particularly well. What does that say to you about this revolution potentially in this particular student body?
I think as the crisis of capitalism deepens, people at this university are made more aware of the need to act, the need to engage in communism, in a communist movement, join a communist organisation, build a communist party capable of making the change they want to see in society. I think, like I said, obviously this has been highlighted in the last few months with the issue in Palestine, also higher cost of living crisis, higher tuition fees, higher rents, things like this. People are becoming more and more aware as the capitalist crisis deepens of the need to engage in a mass movement and organise themselves.
And Jono, in terms of your manifesto, it does seem to be a lot of sort of money off, 50% off this, free this. Is that not just populism?
I've been really struggling financially over the last year or so with the cost of living crisis, and I've been seeing the effect it has on the SU as well for working here. How on days where it should really be busy and bustling in the SU, it goes dead. And my ideas are there to kind of re-inject a bit of life into the SU and save students money and get more engagement in the SU, because the money we make in the SU, because we're a charity, gets recycled back into the free services like Student Advice Centre and all the free schemes and campaigns that the officers do and that we can get from the SU. So I think it's really important that we are doing well financially as well and that we are affordable to students, because I go into the shop and I'm like, it's extortionate, the prices. So I do think helping students with money. So it's well and good giving advice to students about how to budget, but if you have no money to budget in the first place, then you're kind of stuck there a little bit.
And have you done any sort of cost-benefit analysis to these things where you work out how much we can take off a particular item that will make people buy it, enough people buy it that the loss from the reduction in the cost is actually worth doing and gets people doing it, or is it just there's a sort of hope?
I've not been able to see the financial reports of the SU yet. But I have spoken to directors of social enterprise in the SU and deputy directors, and they are all on board for reducing the prices in the SU and seeing what that effect that has. We are a charity, we're a business, so we'd rather make a small profit and actually be making a profit than be making a large loss there, which we are at the minute. We're working in a deficit. So bar one, Interval are both losing money and food's being wasted, thrown away because people aren't engaging in those outlets. So I think we need to incentivize people to go in those outlets, and we can do that through reducing our prices.
And then Daisy, I'll come to you. There's a lot in your manifesto, and I know you're someone who likes to do a hell of a lot of things. You have your things in many pies. As president, if you were to win, how would you prioritise specific issues? Because obviously there's only so much time you have.
I've been asked this question quite a lot, to be fair. And I think it's valid because I've got quite a chunky manifesto and I appreciate that. And I think people do every single year. You get certain officer candidates who put this whole list of this utopian reality that just definitely it is not possible. I think with my manifesto specifically, something that I've really tried to focus on is projects that are kind of partially underway or have permissions to be underway, or there is the funding available for it to be underway, but it's not been given the empowerment to be able to happen. So solar panels on the SU is one of them. That has planning permission. We have the physics department specialises in solar panels, and yet we don't have them on the SU because no one's ever thought of the initiative to actually make sure they're up there. I think similarly with things like the complaints procedure to do with sexual assault victims or victims of harassment or hate crime, that is already conversations that's happening during the restructure of the university, minimising the sexual liaisons and wellbeing teams. There is a space there for the officers and the SU team to go, okay, well, instead of that, we're going to be better at this. And so I think the generalised approach I took to all of my manifesto is there already traction there? Are there students who want to get behind it? Is there some sort of funding? Is there a platform for it? And if yes, it's possible, it just needs the right approach to it. And so I'm hoping that other people resonate with that and see that me as a candidate could be a good driving force for change and empowering students to be able to take those initiatives and to be able to aid groups with those initiatives to make them happen.
I haven't got any further questions at the moment, but if probably I'll leave it to the floor if that's all right.
My first question is, it's quite often, I know it's often now, in that the way in which accountability works within the students' union is only through officer updates that aren't actual manifesto updates, and there is currently no proper procedure for the students here to see whether you will get your manifesto done if you're elected. How do you guys think you will tackle that? How can we here in this room today trust that if we vote for you, we can fully well know that you're going to try your absolute hardest to get every point on that manifesto done and make sure you update students every time you do so?
Awesome. So I know that a lot of my manifesto points, through having conversations with staff that I already know, is very possible and can be delivered quite quickly. And hopefully those points, like the 50% off Friday, the students will be able to see that and actually reap the benefits from that directly. I'm more of a doer than a policy maker. I like to be on the ground. I like to be talking to people. That's just how I work. So I want to make myself more available to be actually on the ground and not just in an ivory tower in an office, and talking to students and being present and not just locked away in meetings at the university for a year.
Yeah, I think a large section of my campaign is transparency and accountability. It's one of the things that I'm most passionate about in running for SU president. I've been a part of this SU, a part of fighting against the university, and I think that is the right word, for 2 years now. And consistently, I think an issue we run into, especially as students, especially as student activists, especially as student workers, or as students who are in need of help, is constant walls of a lack of transparency or a lack of accountability. And I think the officer team and the SU needs a complete overhaul for that. Like, I think we need to completely restructure our democratic structures in the SU. Things like council need to be completely restructured to be more accessible. We need, in my idea, the introduction of democratic forums where all students are able to come, criticise policy, speak about policy that is passed that does actually impact students. A great example of this recently was the completely plant-based universities policy that came to the Students' Union. Hardly any students knew it was happening when that is a major change. So giving students a space to be angry, to question things, to want to have a fundamental understanding of what exactly is going on in the institutions that represent them. And then similarly, also just whether or not we like it, especially the role of SU president, is sometimes having to be in meetings after meetings after meetings with the president, but also picking and choosing which meetings are actually effective for that role to go into. Some meetings cannot make decisions without a student representative present. If you do not feel like you're going to make any traction at that meeting, don't go. Utilise that as a form of protest. So I have a lot of ideas about that, and a lot of ideas on how to restructure democracy and accountability at the SU from a team basis to include more students and make it a more reasonable and measured process to get more change happening.
I think that the way that you two have described changing, like transparency and stuff like this, it's not how it should be. Students should be mobilised as a collective. It shouldn't be like, oh, the SU president does one thing and then the students have a look at it later. The students should be actively involved in transforming their higher education. They should be organised themselves. There shouldn't necessarily need to be a place where students can have a look at what changes what occurring, because they're participating in creating this change. They are the ones fighting for it. So they don't need to see this process because they are actively involved in it. If we mobilise students in this university around the country as a mass movement, then they won't need to have there won't be a disconnect with the change being made, because they will be the ones making the change. It falls on the students themselves to organise themselves as a collective if they don't want to be disconnected from the change that they see at this university. If they want to see meaningful change in higher education, not just at this university, but around the country, then students need to organise themselves under a common banner of communism. They need to organise themselves, and therefore there will be no disconnect to the change.
Okay for me to respond?
Sorry, go on.
In terms of the forums and stuff like that, the thought process wasn't them looking over it. It's more before policy is passed, they can obviously, any student can put forward policy for the SU. Not everything is policy. Some things are definitely on the ground. It is definitely activism. It is definitely a right to protest. It is definitely the freedom to be able to use those things and to do those things and to have those spaces and to have collective action. That is so important. As an activist myself, who has been involved in protests for Palestine, who has been involved in a lot of climate protests for years and years and years through my teens, it is such an important freedom, and that there is no doubt about that. The freedom to be able to securely and safely protest regardless of who you are, what you believe in, it's really, really important. But equally, we have a platform here for policy change. We have a platform here for structured change that enables everyone to get involved. Collective change works for a lot of people, but it also isolates a large group of our student body. We have students who have neurodivergence. We have students who have accessibility issues. We have students who've had traumatic experiences. We have students who are coming from countries that are in global conflicts, who maybe do not want to be a part of outwardly, quite often, very extroverted activism. And I think having good structures in place at the Students' Union enables all students to get involved in activism, whilst equally working to make sure there is common and collective action going on at the same time. And I think that is where transparency and accountability actively happen, is when the weights between those things become equalized instead of one is heavier than the other.
I'd say when you talk about things like foreign students coming over and feeling disconnected from this university and being disconnected with the change, do you not think that the current systems in place play a huge role in this? And the fact that if you're going to continue to use these current systems, if you're just going to continue to appeal to the status quo, then the underlying roots of these issues won't actually change. If you're trying to reform a system that exists where these problems are created, then the problems may appear less apparent, but they still exist. The root cause of these problems still exist.
And that is completely undeniable, which is why we need to completely reform the systems we're utilising. But there is no doubt about that. And I think that the systems in place are isolating. I mean, as a student myself who was like, I lived under the poverty line last year in my first year when I was on leave of absence, the university flicked me off their shoulder. Like, they do not help. And there are plenty of international students, including now, especially with the introduction of this new monitoring system, which is essentially made to catch them out and send them home with no warning. Of course it's isolating, and the systems in place at the Students' Union do absolutely nothing to stop those things happening. I can't deny that, and I don't think many other change makers in the SU can. But I also think that we can utilise the structures we have now to be changed into something that is positive. I don't think we need to stick with the status quo. I think we need to have a mass overhaul with the benefit of everyone in mind. And I do agree with collective action, but I think also structure can be a really beneficial and positive and productive thing.
Yeah, I just had like two questions. I guess one, based on like what you just said at the end there, tying it into also like trying to protect, or to protest. It's like the SU, I suppose in a university management. And this is why, like, the right to protest is kind of, well, we kind of see it as a bit precarious. Like, as the Marxist Society in October, after the events in Palestine where Israel launched their offensive, we organised a protest on campus, but received an incredible amount of flack from the SU bureaucracy. And it turned out that, you know, this wasn't like a genuine like complaint. Like, we challenged this on political grounds because they had like a blatant use of the word intifada, which we thought was completely incorrect. But it turned out like this university, the SU bureaucrat that was challenging us wasn't actually responsible for like protests at all. It was just like some Zionist within the SU, but still he was kind of allowed to try and squash our protest, which kind of comes back to the point of like, how do we make the SU like a genuine student body that's not like tied to university kind of bureaucracy.
Am I okay to answer first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think I entirely agree. The bureaucracy of the SU is broken. It plays a huge role in why I wanted to run as well. We are scared as an institution to do pretty much anything. Everything has to be passed through multiple teams and multiple committees and multiple people who arguably are not responsible for that change even happening, like you experienced. I don't know about that individual situation. I've heard rumours of it. I think we've all seen the way that, especially the university, but also the SU has shut down a lot of Palestine-Israel action, which is outrageous. But I think that when it comes to what I think a lot of people are now referring to as unelected bureaucrats within the Students' Union, which I think are a really, really important topic of conversation, it does come from ensuring that student action is moving upwards. So grassroots movements upwards is getting people elected into those offices, into the role of officer, to challenge them. And I think an issue we're facing at the moment is the officer team now suits an agenda of a lot of students because they have helped a lot of students in a lot of sectors, but equally, I think we need an officer team, and this won't change everything, but we need an officer team that is capable of pushing back on those bureaucrats and going, actually, no, these students want this. Overwhelmingly, the student population is extremely passionate about Palestine as an issue and as an example, equally about women's rights, equally about the climate. We need student officers that go, hang on a minute. If we're going to have this conversation, get the students in the room. If we're going to have this conversation, we need to bring up the bylaws of the SU. If we're going to have this conversation, it is completely legal for any sort of protest action to be happening on the concourse. It is a public space. And I think that's what we're lacking at the moment in the SU, is having that more, I guess, revolutionary power coming out of the Students' Union. And that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be under a communist umbrella. I appreciate that does suit some people. I think it just comes from having people who are a bit feistier maybe and have a bit more political understanding of what student unions were meant to be, which was a political driving force. I mean, students' unions historically have been a massive driving force in many activist events. When you think about Black history, when you think about women's history, when you think about all of these things, the students' union here at Sheffield was the first students' union to have a female ever elected into office in a student space. Like in the UK, we were the first SU to ever have a person of colour elected into a student activism space. And we are not keeping to those values. And I think it's something that does need to change with the leadership that comes from students.
I think the issue with bureaucrats and the pressure that they put on society is to remain sort of like apolitical and establish this sort of the sort of political environment that exists at this university doesn't come from the individual bureaucrats themselves. And I don't think changing these bureaucrats into elected officials or anything like this will actually solve the issue at state. The issue here, I think the issue stems from the fact that there's so many private interests exist at this university. The interests of private companies at this university prevent student activists from going out and speaking their minds and saying and arguing and trying to enforce the change that they want to see, because it is contradictory to the interests of private companies at this university, like BAE Systems, through the AMRC. We funnel so much money into this university, it's ridiculous, it's completely disgraceful. So the reason why the university puts pressure on its bureaucrats and then would also put pressure on elected officials is because it exists partially to serve the interests of these private companies. And if these private companies' interests aren't being served, then they will be served at the expense of the interests of the students, because under capitalism, the interests of the rich, the minority, the ruling class are prioritised over the interests of us, the normal people, the organised masses. So this issue isn't to do with individual bureaucrats or officials or how nice they are. They didn't just feel They didn't just feel particularly nasty when they came in that morning and decided they wanted to irritate the Marxist society. They represent capitalism. They represent private interests. And until these interests and capitalism itself is destroyed, is removed from this university and society as a whole, then these issues will always raise their face, regardless of who deals with them.
For me, at the end of the day, we're a students' union. We're a union of students, and as an officer and as a team, we should be acting in a way that of the interests of the students and their benefit, giving them the power to have a voice and speak their minds and fight on issues that are important to them. So yeah, I think that's really important. This cool would be kind of what being said as well. That's my take.
So I'm a PhD student at university, looking at both as a student, but also about teaching staff. And so I'm part of two unions, formally at least, the UCU, which is by limitation, let's say, is a union, and also the SU, which to be honest was much more like a kind of like shop outreach reference building basically. So like for instance, when you look at UCU strikes that is happening year after year for like 5-6 years now, every time I have discussions with the SU, not simply with the SU job, but we're talking about those elected officials, the best thing I ever receive from them is like, I'm sympathetic, but we represent the diversity of students, diversity of views, and therefore we can't take a stance. We can't actually say anything about the strikes, rather than say, it should be impacted by the strikes once those work and kind of give you a pat on the back and say, it's going to get better soon. So, to be honest, I feel like I'm the SU when this happens, because I'm on the picket line as coming teachers in the university. So I'm also a student here, and we know, and this is a fact, we know that the overwhelming majority of students in this university is sympathetic to what the UCU is fighting for. The UCU is fighting for teacher conditions, which are learning conditions. The UCU is fighting for, against the closure of the outreach department, and the closure of mental health services in the university. And we know the extreme majority of students are sympathetic to that, but hiding behind this facade that we have to represent all humans and be neutral, the SU is refusing to take a stance on this. The SU is refusing basically to stand with PhD students who are teaching, with students who are being affected by these cuts in education, and it is refusing to stand against the university basically. So the SU is not being union potentially is what I'm saying. So I'm wondering how, what your view of the SU as an institution should be. Should it be where it is today, or should it be a union, a union basically, a union which represents the what students, including PhD students, experience and are fighting against union?
Yeah, I think that's completely right. No one at this university, student or likewise, ever really sees the issue as an actual union. They don't see it as a traditional trade union or what a traditional trade union would stand for. They don't see it as a place where the interests of the collective can be represented through action, through mass action. They just see it as like you said, like a cafe or a bar or a restaurant or whatever, and nothing more. And this is in opposition to the actual interests of the students. If the interests through proper unionisation, proper organisation, the interests of the students can be delivered, but that completely means a complete revitalisation of what the SU actually is. And also, it depends on the state of the NUS as well. The current system, the way the NUS is also structured, is completely pathetic. It's not a proper union. It's not a national union for students, even though that's what it stands for. It is a bureaucratic institution that serves very little purpose other than just to basically exist for the sake of existing. There's no actual unification of students around this country, and that's a real problem. That's a real shame. It's wasted potential. It's wasted energy. It's wasted revolutionary energy that can be utilised through proper unionisation throughout the country of students, alongside workers' unions, alongside the UCU and stuff like this. So really enact change both in higher education and in society as a whole. So that's what I say.
I have a very complicated relationship with the SU. On one hand, it has given me work. It's given me means to support myself. It's given me purpose. And it's given me a lot of opportunities. On the other hand, as a Nightline coordinator last year, it closed my service down. I've been working 2 years on volunteering, listening to students on the phone lines at 4 in the morning, and they decided to shut us down because money and too much time and all this. So it hasn't represented my needs 100%, and I don't think that represents students' needs either. But it's complicated because you can't have. We do live in a capitalist society. As I don't want to be in this, but we do, and the money we make in the SU does feed into the campaign and the good we can do. So it's a very much intertwined. If we got rid of all the outlets tomorrow, there would be a slight collapse in the SU and what we can do and how we can support students. But I do believe primarily the SU should be fighting for the needs and advocating for the rights of students and what they want from a university.
Yeah, kind of in echo of both of those, to equalise, I think we can maintain our status as a institution and a building and an organisation that serves students from a community perspective, and I think that is really, really vital. That doesn't take away from the political necessities of the Students' Union. It is just that we serve 33,000 students. A lot of them are on years abroad or on placements, but they have somewhere to come back to, somewhere to relate back to as a student from a community perspective. And whether that is you're a sports society and you love the Foundry every Wednesday, or you're an international student who relies on Isaac within here that is partially a university, partially Students' Union, and most notably students tend to go to the Students' Union section for help, whether or not you're a student who's really financially struggled and gone to SACS, the Student Advice Centre, all of those elements of the Students' Union can continue to exist while we still continue being a political body. What I will say, as someone who's worked in academic facilitation for 2 years at the Students' Union, not at the university, but as a direct contradiction to the university quite a lot of the time, when strikes are happening, we do not make it public enough, but the Students' Union is actively taking a stance on it. We just don't do it publicly, and there is issue with that. We should take a stance on strikes publicly. We are a union that stands with students who are impacted by strikes because the universities and the systems and services behind that do not pay their staff or treat their staff very well. You cannot avoid that fact. But from the Students' Union perspective, we are working to make sure that students are reimbursed, that PGR students are supported. We don't do it well enough. We are not open enough about it. We do not offer that community as well as we could do. But there is work ongoing in the background, and a lot of it comes from academic facilitation, and a lot of it does come from the officer team. I think going forward, in terms of our status as a Students' Union, as a community and as a political body, we need to, again, be less scared of shaking things up, be less scared of being very blatant about the fact that we support things like strikes, because of course we do. We're a union, and we're seeing education crumble essentially before our eyes, and we're seeing these institutions that were once beacons of opportunity become capitalistic and enterprise and military and unethical suspensions and all of these things that we should not align ourselves with. But equally, I think we need to be in mind of all the other services that exist within the Students' Union. So I think we need to, again, have a team that is a lot more open about the fact that we are a political body, be more open with PGR students about a network to ensure that they feel supported, connect them with unions, make sure that their unions as workers are represented them properly, and then bring them back into a community that can support them from the perspective of a student. Do you feel supported by your SU? Do you feel like we're encouraging students to be able to not go beyond their picket lines? For example, last year the Students' Union was a big contender in trying to engage with a scheme that enables PGR students to not have to lose pay by encouraging the students to not go to the lectures or the lessons, so that the PGR students could still be in teaching, still make money from teaching, which I appreciate is quite a controversial point of interest, but they're not actually teaching because the students are staying home. And so the Students' Union was a big driver in that. We just need to be more public about it. And I think if I was elected as SU president, I would play a huge driving role in making sure that we are supporting more schemes like that and making it more blatant to PGRs who are coming to us and asking us questions, that those things are actually happening behind the surface and underneath the surface.
I'd say, just briefly, it's like you talk about how the university is becoming more marketed, more open to capitalism, and that's completely right. But that is endemic to capitalism, right? The capitalism is like a cancer. It has a natural need to continually grow and continually expand itself and continually destroy more and more of society. Yeah. But then refusing to use the SU as anything more than it actually is, to refuse to use it as an actual union of students, and to refuse to use the national union students as a natural national union of students and just continue to allow rampant marketisation in higher education just means that these issues that we currently see, and they appear major to most people, will just grow in size, and they'll just continue to grow. So to continue to use the SU as it is currently used and only make minor slight reforms to the way different aspects of it relates to one another, will only opens the door for more marketisation and more horrors of capitalism into this university and into higher education.
But we're not going to get rid of capitalism right now. And we have a mental health crisis going on at this university where our student suicides are going up, and we are running in an £83,000 deficit as a union. And we have international students who are signing up to houses with addresses that don't exist because there's not enough support in this union, because there's not enough money for it. We've cut our advice services by 2 advisors, so we're running on a 55% capacity because there's not enough money in the students' union. We're not receiving enough money from any of the supporting bodies to be able to make any actualised change. And I really do understand it. It is uncomfortable in so many ways to live in a capitalistic society. I'm a woman who lives in a capitalistic society. I'm a queer person who lives in a capitalistic society. It is really hard. And constantly you're reminded of the fact that the systems that run our entire world have no inclination of supporting you. But equally, we have to, at this point, right now, in the spot we're in office for 1 year, represent views, be strong, be political, be present, but also remember that there is just a person, a student, who is probably really scared and needs someone there right now. And all of this big ideology of removing capitalism is a very valid one and a necessary one. But we also have to keep students alive, and we have to keep them fed, and we have to keep them in safe houses, and we have to make sure that we're not like Durham or Bristol or Newcastle, where our students are dying of mold poisoning randomly in their bedrooms because no one is listening to them. And I think this is the issue I have with an entirely communist ideology on this, is it will not work in the current structure that we're having to perform under. It is not working now, and I do not think that overhaul will be coming at the right time. And it's not that I don't support it, it's just that we are already failing in so many capacities because we do not have enough money. And I think a lot of the ideas that are being translated will not get us any more money to ensure that those students have support when they need immediate support now, and a lot of them are on edge.
You're right, we do live in capitalism right now, and we won't be able to overthrow capitalism tomorrow. But we need to build something that can. We need to build an organisation, a mass movement capable of doing that. And that starts today. That can't start tomorrow, when each crisis continues to deepen and each crisis continues to worsen our lives and the lives of everyone else in society. We cannot wait until a moment when capitalist crisis is on our doorstep, because when it's on our doorstep, it's already too late.
Yeah.
You cannot build to overthrow capitalism when it's already about to destroy you. We must build now. We cannot wait until a moment where things will get better, because they won't get better. And if we keep trying to make these small changes and small little reforms to a system that is a cancer and eats away at our very lives, at the very substance of existence, then we will just be too weak in the future. If we are too weak in the future, then we will just collapse.
I don't want to take away from your opportunity to speak, but very, very quickly, how do you plan, if you get in, on balancing those very valid ideologies with protecting housing rights, protecting the advice centre, protecting SSID that protects the rights of students to graduate, even if the university is taking undue action against them, which is such a common issue? How do you plan on protecting all of those necessary services in the Students' Union, supporting and protecting queer people, supporting and protecting female students, supporting and protecting neurodiverse students, supporting and protecting just general students, international students, mature students, community students, all of these different umbrellas of students that are consistently underrepresented in our student ideology, and also that communism and a lot of far left movements are not entirely sure on their opinion on a lot of those groups as well. How do you plan on taking all of that into account, as well as differing opinions within your movement, whilst making this massive change? And I would genuinely like to know how you specifically, within your policy as SU president, not as an ideology, not from the capacity of you as a Marxist or a communist, from that perspective, from that ideology, but you as SU president in that position, how do you protect all of those services and all of those students while speaking about and acting on your complete overhaul of the capitalistic system that exists?
I said they don't contradict each other. These are one and the same fight. Reform and revolution
But how do you plan on doing it?
one and the same fight. People actively engaging in this fight, in both the day-to-day struggle and the final struggle to abolish capitalism throughout society and at this university, is one and the same fight. The everyday issues
But what
are
would you
part
do?
of this fight.
What would you do to ensure that these, I agree, horrible capitalistic investments that run and rule our university, and they do give us money, whether we like it or not, that goes towards services that are so unbelievably necessary right now. And I understand your ideology of revolution and reform, I do, but how are you actionably going to do that? Give me an example of actionable things you're going to do in the 1 year you have guaranteed you in the Students' Union to make a genuine change for making sure that those things are protected.
We must put pressure on those in Parliament, because we know that higher education can be free and fully funded. The fact that the university is forced to accept the £72 million that it has in the last 10 years from the arms companies like BAE Systems is because higher education isn't free and fully funded like it once was. So pressure must be put on to Parliament to make education free and fully funded once more. This is a larger fight. This is such a big struggle, and the little parts of it are inherent to the big part of it. The overall part of the big struggle is these little parts.
But what I'm asking about is obviously put pressure on Parliament. Will they listen? Hopefully. Have they in the past? No. And that sucks. That's horrible. The systems in place do not work. But what are you going to do locally in this localized role as SU president? And I'll keep asking this question until there is an answer to it. Actionably ensure that the rights of students are protected alongside this ideology. Because you're talking about these small inherent elements of it, but these small inherent elements are the things that keep people alive. Like, I'm speaking from the perspective, without making this a personalized issue, but I was almost homeless last year because I didn't have enough money to pay my rent, and the university threatened to kick me out of my accommodation with 2 weeks' notice and offered me no emotional or financial support. I was going through a mental health crisis and had to take a leave of absence. I was kicked off the mental health and counselling service because I missed 2 appointments because they put my appointment at 9 a.m. even though I have insomnia. Like, I had all of these issues. I come from a background where it's really difficult to get into university. I come from a single parent household. I was struggling to eat. And that is a pretty good situation in comparison to what some other students are dealing with. We have students coming from conflicts, which I'm sure you and many other people in this room are aware of as people who are active activists for Palestine. Students who are coming where they've seen their entire families killed, their homes destroyed. You have to deal with all of those day-to-day small inherent issues that walk through the door of this Students' Union, and you have to support them and go, oh, I'm pressuring Parliament, so don't worry, it's going to change soon, because that doesn't work. Because students do kill themselves and students do become homeless. 30% of students in Sheffield are homeless. They're couch surfing on their friends' sofas. You know, a large proportion of students in Sheffield are not eating 3 meals a day because they can't afford it. That is not a small inherent issue, and pressuring Parliament doesn't change that. And I think, I understand, I really do, but I just want to know what you, again, I'm not trying to be confrontational, but as SU president would do in those actionable spaces where you have an audience with the university, an audience with Parliament quite often. I appreciate you want to put pressure on those 2 things, but what are you going to do for the students that walk in and out of this building every single day? The students that walk into the advice centre every single day. We get over 150, 200 students every single day getting in touch with us with issues that aren't solvable by pressuring Parliament. They're solvable by making sure their landlord is making sure their locks are working so that they don't have someone come into their house and assault them or burgle them. You know, we have students coming in and saying that their food bank has rejected them because they've used it 10 times. They're not allowed to use it anymore. What are you going to do actionably as SU president to make sure that your communist ideals align with those issues?
I think these are just like you say, when, like you give the example of someone having issues with their landlord or someone having issues with food and stuff like this. These are the sort of things that a strong union can help with. If someone is putting, I understand you want the sort of like these individual issues to be solved on an individual basis, and you're right to do so. But a strong union, if someone comes to you as if we were to make the student union an actual union, and so a member of this union came and said, my landlord is putting this to me, it completely ruining my life and completely harming my ability to act within this union, then the union would directly support them with action over that landlord.
But we're
Putting
doing that
a strong union, an actual union, would put pressure on like transport costs in the city. They've gone up. They've completely damaged student lives in the city. A strong union would be in a position where the Travel South Yorkshire wouldn't feel like they would be able to do that, and the issue itself wouldn't arise. I know these small issues will come up on a day-to-day basis, and they will be resolved by a strong union as the time comes. I can't sit here and just say now, if someone comes to me in like a few months and whatever with a really specific issue, how I'm going to specifically deal with it when I know that it is endemic of a larger issue. These smaller issues will be resolved on that basis, on an individual basis.
I don't know whether you have a.
I think that having a communist SU within a capitalist society is just not realistic within a year. And it's a shame. And I would love a system which is better, but it's not the system we've got. It's not the hands we've been dealt, and it is really tough. But we need to be making changes, feasible, realistic changes that will have a benefit on students. And for example, the transport, the Sheffield City Council, the funding's been cut by the Tories for that Zoom card scheme. You could unionize and like go to them and protest and put pressure on them, but if the money's not there, it's not there, and it's just not realistic. Which is why a lot of my manifesto is like small changes that are realistic and achievable within a year, if not sooner, and that will actually have a benefit on the lives of students, which as a student representative, you should be representing the majority of students and what they need. What they need now is support, financial support, mental support, and academic support. And that's just my perspective on that from the bottom line.
I think we've got a question from Zoe.
Okay, so as you know, Sheffield Students' Union is currently affiliated with the National Union of Students. We have been for years. I don't think this one haven't, as far as I'm aware. We've seen some SUs recently in the past couple of years disaffiliate from NUS. Reasons being the NUS as a charity giving loans to private company, losing over £2 million that could have been put towards actually helping students, but wasn't. And then also investigations seeing massive bigotry within NUS liberation spaces, especially against against women, queer people during conferences, and of course the evidence that the NUS is institutionally anti-Semitic, in which there is not been, I would believe, evidence thus far to remove that claim. So, but the NUS also does a lot of students will say some good as well, and they're their political campaign group that helps Sheffield students. So, in light of that, do you think we should remain affiliated with the NUS?
I'm going to be honest, I'm not as familiar with the NUS as I probably should be, but hopefully if I do get the role, I would be trained and hopefully taught about it. But we had the similar thing with Nightline. We had the Nightline Association, and the SU decided that because of the Nightline Association and a whole other vast amount of reasons that they were not moving fast enough to justify staying affiliated with them. So we broke away and we shut down Sheffield Nightline. So I've been in those conversations about that, which I think might apply to the NUS. If it's not working for us, and if we could be using like that time spent with the NUS to doing other things, time and resources, and put them towards things that will actually support students, then I definitely want to look into that and not just stay with the NUS because we have for years now. So that's me.
My understanding of it is that we do an annual referendum during elections where students get to decide whether or not we remain a part of the NUS. I think that system should remain. I think it should be up to the students. We talk about collective action. That is collective action, ensuring that students have the universal opportunity to be able to vote on whether or not we remain in the NUS. I think one thing that lacks from that is the fact that we don't have enough education on what exactly the NUS does. That is rights and wrongs. And I think that, again, like we were talking about, recreating the union as a political space plays a huge role in making sure that the NUS returns to being a proper and effective political space. It is the role of the members of bigger organisations, like we have discussed, to push for a better change. So I think keep the referendum. Students can decide every year, but make sure there's a much bigger push and a much bigger campaign around educating students on exactly what the NUS is. And if we choose to remain, pushing them to be a much better and much more representative body.
I'd say if the NUS can become a tool for a mass student movement around the country to enact serious change, to enact wider societal change and be part of a wider workers' movement, if it becomes clear that that is an opportunity that can develop from the NUS, from a true national union of students, then I would support the student union remaining in the NUS. Like you said, I think it's up to the students, it's democratic in the referendum to do so. But from my perspective personally, if it becomes apparent that it has a part to play within a wider movement, and I say that it probably can have this part, then I would support staying within the NUS.
Would you agree with making the referendum every year, because it's now been changed to every 2 years? So this year we won't be able to say if we want to stay as well as the NUS. I have opinions about the NUS, and I will not be allowed to vote on them because this is my last year here.
Mhm.
Is that fair? Should we
Yeah,
do it every year again?
I would say annually. I think annually is important. I think it is, especially with bodies like the NUS, it is so dependent on the political situation. And a year ago, we didn't have Israel Palestine. A year ago, we were not in a recession. A year ago, we were in a very different stage of COVID recovery. It should be annually. We are moving in a dynamic where things are changing at such a speed that it should be annual.
Yeah, I completely agree. It should be annual. I didn't know it was no longer annually. I would say, yeah, definitely.
That's it.
We'll take your question first.
Hi, before I just want to say that I'm very lucky as a student. I'm able to eat 3 meals a day and I have a roof over my head. There's a bit of black mold in the bathroom, but
Boo.
the roof is intact and because it's in halls, there's bills not a worry. I have the heating on without worrying about that, reducing the amount I get to eat in a day. This is because I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't go out, I spend briefly. Next year that won't be enough because the university is continuing to jack up rents. Since I came here in 2021, the price for an equivalent room exactly the same, which was originally a bit overpriced, is now £40 per week more overpriced, or will be in 2025. What are your policies for stopping this price gouging? How will you go about that as president of the SU?
I'd say I champion for rents to be capped at a running cost price. I think rents immediately should be lowered and then run at a running cost price. But also, like I say, when we were talking about landlords earlier, I think that a proper students' union, would put additional pressure on landlords continually. And then also, I know this might irritate you a little bit, but the wider picture is to abolish landlordism because it's so parasitic and it damages students' lives. So the wider struggle is one, like you say, the nearer struggle, rent caps, stuff like this, but it's also against landlordism and it's also against capitalism as a whole and the evils that exist within it. So I'd say it all comes back to building a wider student movement, a wider movement around the country alongside workers against capitalism.
Yeah, those prices are extortionate, and it's insane that we live in a world where that those people have the power to raise those prices. I don't have anything directly in my manifesto about that, but I do have points about bringing down the prices in the SU and making it more affordable, and just generally trying to save you money in any way possible. That money that you save there can be put towards your bills. But no, yeah, I'd be definitely open to having conversations with the landlords or the ACS accommodation services about putting a cap on prices or just figuring out a way we can support students with that.
Yeah, if I'm correct, I think University of Sheffield is the largest landlord in Sheffield. I believe they own so many properties and they're extortionately priced. I remember applying to university and being completely baffled by the fact that it was 170 quid to live in a room that is not a livable size at all, in a kitchen that's not maintained properly. And the amount of times, on the coldest day of the year last year, my heating went out and it took maintenance 3 days to turn the heating back on, and we were paying 170 quid for that. and trying to push against those systems is almost impossible, and they find every single opportunity to take money. So disagree with it entirely, and I do agree it is about removing landlordism from university sectors. Do I think it's going to happen anytime soon? No. Do I think it's a fair fight? Yes. And I think it's important from a larger scale as well as a smaller scale. I think a big part of my manifesto is ensuring that housing is secure, safe and affordable for students, which I know is such a broad and vague term. But it's most notably making sure that for eviction agreements made by the university specifically, that there's a longer waiting period time. So at the moment it's 2 weeks. I want it to be 6. I know that is not enough. I just think that in feasibility, convincing the university to have 6 weeks for students to be able to make a return or rent, or at least put in an appeal through the university to keep their status as a student living in accommodation, is much more feasible than 2 weeks. And also working with the university, which I think you do have to do when it comes to ACS, to lower the prices. They do not need that money, and they are finding ways to make more money. I think other universities have done it. I know Manchester has done it. I know that Leeds is working towards it. I know that Liverpool is working towards it, in working with their universities from a political perspective, utilising the pressure of MPs that support them to put pressure on the university to put their rent down to 2020 or 2019 prices, which is, in our case, about 145 quid a week. Still way too expensive, but within a year, and with that movement, hopefully utilising that.
We'll go to the back now, that's all right. I saw your hand up first.
So if students in uni accommodation organise like a rent strike, would you take a position with the XU to support that strike unilaterally? And which effectively would put you in conflict with the university itself as the landlord and you, would you support the student action?
Yes, I was part of a rent strike in 2020 because I started during COVID. I was home for 6 months and they were still making me pay. So I helped out with an occupation of the arts tower and a march for a rent rebate, which we got, and I managed to get a rent rebate for that. So I would definitely be in support of that.
Yeah, so I'm completely in support of that. I think rent strikes can be really effective. We've seen it in Manchester. That was a really, really effective rent strike. I actually helped with some of the organisational elements of the Manchester one, and have worked with multiple students on reforming rent strikes and making sure that there's proper accessibility packs and rent strikes for students from working class backgrounds as well. So not only would I support it, but I would want to enable students to have the resources to be able to do it safely and have legal support whilst doing it.
Yeah, of course, I'd completely support rent strikes here in Sheffield, but also I'd say the best way to make a most effective rent strike is to try to make it a more national one, to make it a sort of national effort to try and organise students around the country on a rent strike and then on more issues, because this is the most effective way that we can enact change is a mass movement, not just here in Sheffield. Because you had your rebate from your rent strike, but then like you were saying, the rents are still going up extortionately, and I'd say exactly. Yeah, and I'd say, well, because you're one, whilst you got your rebate, I'd say it wasn't a national one, so it wasn't as effective as it could have been if it was properly organised on a mass movement.
Yeah, I had the same question actually about rent strikes. It's really good to hear that. Well, from the three we have here, whoever is elected,
rent strikes,
yeah. Whoever happens. Yeah, I think there's a lot of special mission presidents when it comes to asking some students or getting used to you to remain neutral and those students that yes, I think take sides basically, even though we know which side the students are on. I think very special to the university. I think yes, you guys go with your authority. Yeah, it's really good to hear you guys will support on strikes. It's really good to hear you guys will support the strikes. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing when we go on strike. Well, you are president. When we go on strike, which would be happening, I think, next year. I can't wait to see you guys really well doing that. This is why you for our strike. This is why GTAs are on strike, and this is why you should support them, and it feels right then to support them. So, yeah, we'll keep you accountable to that.
Please do. Yeah.
And would you encourage striking, instead of just supporting it from the outside? Would you get up there and say this is what we should be doing and be into this process?
If the conditions were right, yeah, definitely. I think you can only encourage a rent strike if you think it's going to be effective, because these things you can't just go around like saying, oh, let's rent strike today and then let's rent strike tomorrow for no reason. It has to be an organised collective action sort of thing. And like I'd say, it should be a national movement as well. This is the most effective way to have a rent strike. So if that was a possibility, then yeah, of course, I'd champion that. Has to be a larger movement that has to organise itself. But of course, I'd support that and I'd encourage that definitely if it was, as I'd say, organised well and what I'd see to be effective.
And I entirely second that. I think that is really, really important. I think, again, if the conditions are right. I would also say that if other cities and other universities across the country were engaging with a rent strike and maybe we didn't feel the conditions were correct here, I would encourage students to support them. Like if they have the capacity to be able to go and support those students in rent striking, support those students in protests, support those students in on the ground activism with those sorts of things, or if we have the capacity as a students' union to maybe advise or offer resources to students from other cities with less proactive SUs, I would absolutely encourage us to get involved with those as well.
Just broken record, so yeah.
Yeah.
As a part-time officer now, I've seen that the university, when they engage with the SU or when SU officers get put in these meetings with the university, only ever the full-time officers. Part-time officers seemingly we sort of exist in a world from the officer team sometimes, and our voices are often undermined, not on purpose by current officers, but just in the way the SU work, because we only have 8 hours a week, and it makes liberation in general seem quite separate from the role of SU president. If you are elected SU president, how will you engage with your part-time officer colleagues, and how will you ensure that their voices and their opinions are actually heard and considered when making decisions in the role?
For me, a lot of my manifesto points I know I can do and I can do quickly, which hopefully will free me up going into those meetings at the university to advocate for my officers. And I think the part-time officers are such a crucial part of our student voice. So I think your time is precious, 8 hours a week, not very long. So I would spend those 8 hours with you, talking to you, discussing what you want me to take forward to the university and be your advocate and you're the person pushing your stuff instead of being bogged down by my own stuff that I want to do. I want to be available to support all my officers.
First of all, pay them more. Oh my god, like you're working, I would say almost approximately a third of the hours. I know it's not explicitly a third of the hours, and you're definitely not getting a third of the pay. Also, part-time officers tend to work overtime anyway. A big part of the conversation I'd like to have with the SU is a conversation around overtime, because multiple student workers work overtime. A lot of people in Foundry and Bar 1 are found to sometimes be working overtime. And if I'm right in saying it, are often not paid for that overtime.
Depends on the manager.
Yeah, and that is wrong. Generally.
Adjusting the hours.
Yeah. And so pay them more. I think a first route to support is making sure that they're paid for the hours they're doing, paid for the work they're doing, and paid enough for the work they're doing, because you're working a really hard job and a very, very different job to an FTO, because it's not your whole life. You've got a degree, you've got exams, you've got assessments. That's really important. Well-being is important. But equally, to ensure that voices are heard, I think from my personal perspective as SU president candidate and on my manifesto, I want to do a liberation audit of the Students' Union. So making sure that from an external and internal point of view, we are a safe space for all marginalised communities and communities that are not considered marginalised. And I would love to engage with the PTOs if they have time to, if they're not working on their own projects, but even if it's just a chat or actually pulling them in for specified focus groups to get them in to help with that and get their opinions as elected officials, because that's what they are. And I think outside of my own manifesto policies in terms of liberation, I think it is just about having a more connected bridge between what FTOs do and what PTOs do. You have, as at PTOs, if I'm correct, there is kind of like an unofficial link between Liberation Officer and the PTOs. There tends to be, yeah.
It's got very incredible semantics, but it's not explicitly like.
Exactly. I think making that explicit would be important, making sure the Liberation Officer is held accountable by the PTOs as well as by all the accountability measures to make sure that they're serving the PTOs and treating them with the respect and giving them the workload that they can handle considering the poor hours they're given.
I mean, personally, I don't know much about the relationship between part-time officers and full-time officers, but I think the issues that you've raised are sort of indicative of a quite weak student union, in the sense that like people working for the students' union don't feel connected to the actual union itself. I think that's just indicative of a wider issue at the SU, and the fact that it fails its purpose as an actual union. And again, this issue of a lack of connectivity comes from the fact that the students' union isn't a proper union. So I think all these issues are resolved from a more efficient students' union overall.
Do you have anything else? I don't know. We'll do some closing remarks if anyone wants to make any. Start with you, John.
Oh God.
We can come back round if we need to.
I can start first.
If you want to start
Yeah,
first,
yeah.
start first.
All I will say is I'm really grateful for having this opportunity, and thank you so much to Marxist for reaching out. Specifically, I know we had a small conversation about it and making sure this happened. I think it's something that is lacking from SU elections, especially in Sheffield. We should have debates. We should have an open forum for students to come and ask questions of the people that are being paid by their union to represent them. The fact it doesn't happen, in my opinion, is outrageous. But equally, all this has kind of shown me in the conversations we've had is that we have an exceptional breadth of opinion and exceptional breadth of passions at the university and at the SU, and that the SU needs to serve them. We need to be representing student workers. We need to be representing PGRs who are both a student and a staff member, which is a really precarious position to be in, especially in the political landscape at the moment. You know, we need to keep supporting students on issues that affect them in their day-to-day life, but also be an action and a tool for global change and national change, and make sure that we're, remarking and acting on things that we do not want to affiliate ourselves with. Arms, demilitarizing, it is important. It's really important. We need to work on it. But we need to make sure that activism is also maintaining the day-to-day well-being of students. And I think moving forward and working with other candidates and hearing the ideas and working with students, it would be amazing to see what we can do as an institution, an organisation, and as a charity and as a union, and how we can utilise all of those umbrella terms to make something that actually works for everyone and actually listens to everyone and actually represents everyone. So thank you very much.
I'd say it was really interesting, like hearing both of your opinions out on different questions and the different policies that you'd implement. I'd like to say, like, your one about the solar panels on the SU roofs, that's something I would support, and I would definitely support if you got elected. I think that's a really good initiative. But I'd say that we shouldn't stop there on stuff like this.
Yeah.
I'd say it's all well and good having solar panels on some of our roofs, but that's not going to prevent the climate catastrophe that's occurring.
No.
I think that these issues are indicative of a wider struggle that must be waged today. Like we were saying this earlier, we cannot wait any longer. This is something that we must build towards being able to fight against right now. And I think this one starts within a student community, which is currently the student union. So I'd say, vote Communist, vote for me in the SU election, but also join an organisation wanting to build against these issues, building an organisation capable of overthrowing capitalism. And we say, we're not able to overthrow capitalism today. We're not. And that is because we don't have an organisation capable of leading a mass movement against capitalism. So I'd say vote for me in the SU elections, but more importantly, organise yourselves and engage within the Revolutionary Communist Party.
Thank you for having me. It's my first Hustings. It's been kind of interesting to be everyone's staring at you.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's been really lovely to hear, be able to talk more about our manifesto points and hearing different perspectives. Because we're all students at the end of the day, and we all have our opinions, and they should all be heard. And I'm very grateful we had this opportunity to do this. So yeah, that's just me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.